All right, have and have not fans. This is the video I've been promising for at least, well, 3 or 4 videos ago, but it is a top 10 list of, in my opinion, the most emotional moments in the haves and the have-nots. Now, just a quick disclaimer here. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I just want to let you know that any entries regarding Quincy Jr.'s death, him being found by Benny and then Hannah finding out, the funeral home scene, those are not going to be on this list simply due to the fact that it's a given that that's automatically a number one. Now, when I talk about that, I'm talking from the time that Benny actually found Quincy Jr. at Quita's house to the time where he was shot. Hannah had her emotional breakdown in the hospital, and then you had Benny, Hannah, and Candace going at it at the funeral home, and then Hannah saying the emotional goodbye to Quincy Jr. That's without a given like the most powerful moment of the show, so it is not on the list, just to be fair to these other moments. One other moment that's not going to be on here, because I've already mentioned it in like 2 or 3 videos, is when Hannah prays for David in she's praying for Benny with David in season 1 after Benny was placed in jail under false pretenses because David was originally trying to get Candace arrested. So just know that anything in regards to the return to the death of Quincy Jr. is not going to be on this list, nor is Hannah praying with David. So with that being said, I'm not going to ramble too much. I just want to get right into the video. So in no particular order, here's my list. Now we have where Katherine and Jim find out that Wyatt is dead. Now keep in mind, this is one of the more recent events in the series where Wyatt actually OD'd after getting out of jail. Basically, he's at the Sarandon Hotel. He has his inheritance money. He's having this big party, getting all the drugs that he can possibly, I guess you could say, insert into his body. And then he was thought to be dead. And what was it, like the security at the hotel, and they tried to check a pulse and whatnot, but he was still, he wasn't responsive, so they declared him dead. But then David comes in there, he checks, I believe the paramedics were there too. He said there was a pulse, and then next thing you know, he's in the hospital and he's alive. So just like, I don't know, they must have, aside from the main characters who are not perfect by any stretch of imagination, there are some very incompetent, so I guess you could say, medical officials in the haves and the have-nots. So this moment was impactful due to the fact that Katherine was already broken after the whole situation in regards to Amanda, and then she just knew that with that inheritance money, Wyatt would pretty much just crash himself into a brick wall. And when Jennifer Salison and the police officer came by to announce that he was dead, she literally was like, if I'm not mistaken, falling down the stairs. It was just such a powerful moment. And then from there, you have where Hannah was given the task by Katherine to go to jail and then tell Jim. And then Jim, being an asshole, was literally going off on Hannah about, you just want to throw this in my face. What do you want? Money, blah, blah, blah. But then he's like, I'm here to tell you that your son is dead. And then Jim literally broke down. It's amazing how he went from being the class #1 asshole to literally begging Hannah, hey, there's somebody I need you to talk to for me so I can get out of here to see my son. And then Hannah walks off. So in my opinion, those two's reaction to Wyatt's quote-unquote death was definitely one for the record books in terms of emotional moments within the haves and the have-nots. And next tip here, number 9, we have where Candace opens up to Oscar. What I mean by that is that, for once, she isn't fabricating the truth. She isn't making up any story. She's telling the truth about, here's what happened in my younger life. I have a son. If I'm not mistaken, this was something that happened after Amanda's funeral, after Katherine bust the bottle upside of Candace's head and interrogated her in regards to Amanda's death. Candace goes back to the Sarandon Hotel. Literally, her head is just, I believe she was like, had her hand on her head because it was still hurting. And then Oscar came out of his room and is like, hey, something's wrong, you look a mess. And next thing you know, those two, they don't sleep together, because I believe even Candace says, what's wrong with you? Are you gay? Because all you did was hold me last night. I know, you just need to be comforted. And then from there, Candace finally opened up about, her past, basically her history. And if I'm not mistaken, those two actually had sex after that. So remember that at that point, Oscar was just the quote-unquote creeper from the bar that wanted to pay Candace to have sex with him. But until that point, Candace was always, skeptical, not sure what to think of Oscar. She just knew that something was up with him. And then when she finally opened up about the truth, that's when those two grew closer. They went to New York. I believe he like filled up an apartment and then her house with flowers and went on the carriage ride. And it looked like they were actually in love, but it turned out to be a con set up to get the money she extorted back from Jim. So even though she was getting what she deserved, it was a bit emotional to have her finally break down and cry, have Oscar hold her. And I believe even after Hannah came over to say, I love you, and I forgive you for everything, please forgive me too. But Candace told her to leave. And then that's when Oscar embraced her and those two really started to get close. So even though it was all an act, it was emotional to have Candace finally open up about her history. And now we go on to the next moment where Tony wants Benny off of life support. That was an a-hole move, especially after not even knowing that Benny may or may not have been a match for a kidney. Because remember, at that point, the only reason Tony came back into Benny's life was because he was dying. I believe kidney was failing him and he needs another one in order to live. He has I guess you could say a numerous amount of other children that have been tested, but none of them were a match. And now he's like, I know Benny can save my life. The thing that got me about Tony is that there was never a test conducted. It's just that Benny was almost on his deathbed, almost a vegetable, and he wanted his kidney. So can you imagine what would have happened if, he was taken off life support, got the kidney removed, and it turned out he wasn't a match? So the reason this moment's on the list is because during this time, that's where Hannah and Candace actually had to put aside their differences and work together just to get Benny still on life support. Because I remember that Hannah was taken to court and she was literally losing the case until Candace stepped in at the 11th hour to use her lawyer know-how and made sure that Tony was kept away from Benny. And then from there, it was just amazing that I believe one scene was like, hey, I want to go see Benny. Come with me. Tell me where he is. Like, I'd rather ride with the devil of hell than get in the car with you. That's what Hannah said. But I remember after the courtroom scene, Hannah lost the case. And then Candace said, look, get in the car with me. I'm not getting in the car with you. Mama, Hannah, if you don't come with me now, you won't be able to say goodbye to Benny. It's for Benny. And it's like, even though Hannah couldn't stand Candace, she put that aside for the sake of Benny. They get to the hospital and Benny's gone. They think that Tony was the one to take him, but it turns out that Hannah got arrested because Tony thought that she was hiding Benny. And then we learned it was Katherine that basically moved into another hospital where he got better treatment. So, but that being said, the fact that Hannah and Candace came together, albeit temporarily, for the sake of Benny was great. Not to mention, we finally got to see Candace utilize some of her law school capabilities in the courtroom. Next, we get to now this moment is a Candace moment, but hear me out. It does involve Quincy Jr. However, it doesn't involve him being found up until his death. It's actually way before that. If I'm not mistaken, this is towards the end of season 2, after, Candace got away from the Malones, but she lost everything. She got $5,000 from Warlock, and she was staying with, after Quincy was on the loose, and she was staying with Jeffrey at the time, but came over to Hannah's house because Benny called her over there, because I believe this is after he got out of the hospital and was like, look, if I died, y'all two wouldn't speak with each other, so we're going to sell this right now. And then basically after a lot of badgering from Hannah, it was finally brought up, he's dead, Quincy Jr.'s dead. And then Candace told the story about how she was trying to get away from Quincy. He took their son and said, hey, if you want your son, you bring me X amount of money. She came back with the money, but it turns out that, we went fishing, but then I pushed him in the river and he died. And then after that, Candace broke down. Now, even when she told that story, it was emotional. There was a lot of skepticism within the Half and Half Not community, because even though it was a very tearful scene, Candace never had the best track record up until that point into telling the truth. So for all we know, Quincy Jr. was probably alive, but she was literally lying like she normally did, because up until that point, I think it may have been 3 to 5 times she lied about her backstory to, Amanda, Wyatt, the halves, if you will, and other situations where she literally just told lies. So it was hard to even believe the fact that he was dead. Thankfully, it turned out not to be the truth. But in any case, the fact that she literally broke down and said that he was dead, but then, even Hannah was like, I believe in the finale episode, that was weird about the finale of season 2. There was only like one scene between Hannah and Candace, like Benny was asleep, and literally was like, look, I believe in God, and I just feel in my heart that that baby is alive. And it turns out she was right. So now we move on to number 6. And this is again about a situation between a child and their parent, when Celine is literally pleading with Carlos. Well, not so much pleading with Carlos, but Carlos pleading with Jim. Well, not even pleading. Let me break it down. Wow, I'm actually looking at this list I have here in front of me. A lot of these moments are from season 2, believe it or not. Interesting. But it was towards the ending of the episode before the season 2 finale, where Jim and David are running for office. They have their campaign. Carlos was working in the campaign office. Landon gave him some paperwork. He went over to Jim's house to drop it off. And then remember, this is his dad. Celine walks by the office while Jim is kind of at his desk, and Carlos is like, hey, Mr. Cryer, I have some paperwork from the office. Oh, you just leave it over there. And then Celine walks by, asks what he's doing there, and then Jim is like, hey, get out of here. And then Carlos is like, hey, don't talk to her like that. And that's when the other shoe dropped. Literally, I'm your son. You never came home. I knew you weren't coming back. And then he leaves. And then Celine in the finale at the beginning pleads with Jim, just get to know your son. I'm not asking you. He's not asking for money. He's just asking for your time. And then Jim, again, being a classic asshole, says that, hey, I know what it's all about. It's all about money. Everybody around me wants money, money, money. And just suspect that, hey, if he didn't act the way he did, a lot of things may have not played out the way they did, because some fans are speculating, again, I've even said it before, perhaps either Celine or Carlos was the one to shoot Amanda, and due to the whole situation of, I'm neglecting my other 2 children to focus on Wyatt and Amanda because they're my real children. So, I mean, again, that's just speculation there, but the fact that Celine, again, I feel like Tyler Perry repeated what he did with Jeffrey at the end of season 1, where he came out of the closet, where the entire season he really didn't have a lot of fans because he was a creepy gay guy, going after Wyatt and sabotaging him. But then when he finally broke down and talked to his parents about it, you felt sorry for him. The same thing with Celine. She had literally been a vindictive, two-faced, hypocritical friend, if you will, to Hannah, and then he didn't like her. But now she's actually tearfully pleading with, Jim about, hey, get to know your son, and he literally dismisses her. So again, I feel like that was a great moment, because it really did draw up emotion in terms of a character you hated to watch or not even cared about, but at that moment you saw that it actually had a heart. And now we move to number 5 here. Okay, this one is an interesting one here. When it comes down to it, this is during Justin's debut scene, after he's called over to Candace's house by his mom, if I'm not mistaken, and he arrests Jeffrey for DUI. Jeffrey's in the back of the cop car. Justin gets in there with him, and during that time, you could tell this guy's a creep, or basically in the closet. He most likely has done this before, where he arrests people, and if I'm not mistaken, it's really only because Candace told him that, hey, he just came out of the closet, so he's been drinking and his parents hasn't taken it well. That's why he's really upset. And it's when Justin kind of took an interest in him. So during that scene, it was literally heartbreaking to watch Jeffrey literally being demoralized and humiliated. And I almost like cut the episode off, not just because I felt so bad for Jeffrey. That was such a heartbreaking scene. He was literally just broken, I just, wow. And then it's amazing to see where he is now, where he has the power over Justin, so to speak. So it really just shows that he went from being like this sniveling guy in the back of a cop car who's literally being emotionally assaulted by this guy, because Justin was about to make him do stuff, and that was, I can't even imagine. That was just disgusting. So that's why I feel like that was definitely an emotional scene in my book. And this is going to be an interesting one here, where we talk about at number 4 about Veronica's tantrum in the Sarandon Hotel bar. Remember, at that point, that's where she was suspecting there was something going on between David and Maggie Day. Walked up, took a glass of water and threw it at Maggie. Landon's like, hey, there's cameras, so let's leave. Those 2 left. And then that's when I believe David's trigger word for Veronica was a cruel, vindictive, cold bitch. And then she went off. She was like, call me a bitch again. He did. And then she literally started tearing that bar up. The reason this is emotional and powerful is because this was one of the first true scenes where you can tell that there was something wrong with Veronica. And then the fact that David was literally stone-faced the entire time she was throwing glasses and tossing chairs around, it really showed me that this was this was not the first time that David has seen Veronica like this, most likely due to the fact that in the past she was addicted to painkillers and, possibly taking drugs and whatnot. So, and of course, drinking. So in my mind, this was one of the first signs of Veronica's character, going down the mountain, so to speak, in an avalanche format where you knew that something was wrong and things were only going to get worse. So again, I feel like her having that breakdown in the bar was definitely one for the record books. And let's see here. Wow. Okay, 3 more to go. This is a good one. This is a good one. We have where Hannah prays for Jim, which is ironic because I said one moment that wasn't going to be in this list was where she prays with David for Benny. But this was the scene after Amanda's death, and then Hannah called in the cleaners to have them, get rid of the blood in the room and clean the room thoroughly. And then Jim literally went off on Hannah, but she literally started speaking in, I wouldn't say speaking in tongues, but just saying, I rebuke you, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't mean to say that like that, but I literally can't recall word for word what she said. But basically, she was literally rebuking literally the evilness coming out of Jim's mouth. And he's like, are you done? You're fired. And then told her to leave. Hannah left, hey, she was like, hey, you know what? I'm gone. But then after she left, not like 5 footsteps away from the door, she heard Jim breaking down and just going on the floor crying. She jumped in there and held him. And well, maybe she didn't pray for him at that moment, but it was like, she held him and was like, look, now do you understand why I did what I did? Because I knew that every time you walked into this room, if you saw that blood on the wall, you would just break down like you are now. Because remember, Hannah was the one that found Amanda, so she knew exactly what that room looked like, and she knew the impact it would have on Jim and Katherine. If I'm not mistaken, Katherine and Hannah were on the couch, and she was like, look, I called the cleaners. Look, I know it wasn't my call to make, but I saw what that room looked like, and I know what kind of impact it would have on you if you walked to that room and saw what I saw. So Hannah was actually doing what she thought best for the criers, and she was right. And then the fact that, she picked Jim up off the floor, and I believe, like, I don't know how she can ever forgive me, or how I can be forgiven for what I've done. And if I'm not mistaken, Hannah said that God will forgive you. And Jim kind of just looked at her, a bit puzzled. And I think he walked out of the room not knowing what to do. Like, I was kind of like, man, he could have at least said thank you. But in that moment, I felt like she just planted a seed within his heart about forgiveness. And to me, that was a ripple effect, because up until that point, Jim wasn't like mean to Hannah, but he really wasn't like, friendly towards her. Especially like, things like, hey, my son's in jail, and then Katherine's helping her out by getting a lawyer. And basically Jim was always like, what, you always do this with the help. You start giving them money and stuff like that, where does it end? But now you finally saw a change in Jim. And I think the first big change was the day of Amanda's funeral, where Hannah comes over in the morning and says good morning. And Jim says, good morning, Hannah, you look nice today. And you really see a change within the two in terms of their dynamic. It was very similar to when Veronica got Benny out of jail back in season 1. And again, Hannah and Veronica were not on good terms. But after getting Benny out of jail, Veronica came over to the house, and then Hannah's like, hello, Miss Harrington, I made you a cake, and I'll put it in the front seat of your car. So you saw those two were getting on good terms. And again, this is early haves and have-nots, not where it is now. But the fact that Hannah was able to see that Jim needed help even when he was lashing out at her was definitely a powerful scene. Next, we get to number 2. We're almost done, and thanks for hanging in there with me, where Jeffrey comes out of the closet. And again, similar to when Celine was pleading with Jim to get to know Carlos, it was a character where that entire season I was not a fan of Jeffrey, not because he was gay, but for the fact that he was literally creeping on Wyatt, ruining his chances to get back with Laura, and literally kind of sabotaging his recovery for the sake of those two being together. So when he finally came out to his parents, you really saw Jeffrey being vulnerable, and also the fact that David was loving on his son, but then Veronica, we just saw the beginning. Well, we saw slight glimpses within season 1 where Jeffrey was trying to tell Veronica he was gay, but he couldn't even finish the sentence. We saw him being chastised, belittled, treated like a toddler whenever she was around. And she literally was like, you were better off never being born. And that scene was literally the birth of what became the blackmail, the black sedan, getting Melissa pregnant, and the list goes on. So Jeffrey coming out was definitely an emotional scene, just because, again, maybe there are people out there who were like Jeffrey who had trouble coming out to their parents. So maybe that scene was kind of written out to individuals who have trouble being who, not necessarily gay, but literally just say being who they are, so to speak. So I really feel like that's a definite runner up here. And we get to number one. And I don't know if you all, I'm 26 years old, but I'm a sucker for classic movies. 12 Angry Men is one of my favorites, just because of the fact that it's 12 men in one room like the entire movie, but there's so much that goes down. Now, the reason this is number one is because of the relation to 12 Angry Men, in my opinion. Amanda's death. Now, when I say Amanda's death, I'm talking about the impact it has on everybody. I'm talking about how everyone's literally trapped in the living room for a couple episodes, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3, because it was when the morning of Jim announcing he's running for governor, but instead it was, if I'm not mistaken, Katherine, Celine, Hannah, Veronica, David, in the living room of the Crier house, because Amanda's dead, of course, and everybody's doing an investigation, and you're just seeing how they're trapped in this one room, but it's a lot of tension. Like, I believe like most of the episode was in that space between the characters, and it was just definitely a crazy situation. Then Jim finally shows up. I'm talking about Katherine lashing out Celine, dragging her out by her hair, Jim showing up, and then him breaking down, then Katherine going off on Jim about, why didn't you listen to me? Why didn't you listen to me when I told you we should have her in an institution? And then you have where you get backstory about how she felt cursed ever since she met Jim. And of course, when the body bag comes down the stairs and then Jim and Katherine look at the body, I can just go on and on and on. But the fact that during that time, I believe, Wyatt and Jeffrey were there too. But the fact that it was just so damn powerful during that scene. And in the midst of it, Veronica was still Veronica, just saying, Jeffrey, Melissa's going to be here soon. It's just like, what's Melissa going to do here? And I believe one of the most powerful scenes was when David looked at Veronica like, bitch, are you crazy? Our friends have lost a child. And I believe like Hannah is trying to give, Katherine a glass of water, and she's so shaken she can't even hold it. And because David's telling Veronica about the situation at hand, and the camera pans over to Katherine literally struggling to hold a glass of water because she is so traumatized by the situation. Yet Veronica's so self-centered in terms of, we'll talk about this late. No. We're going to talk about your behavior with Jeffrey later. Well, excuse me. He's like, you know what? You're right. This isn't the time, but we will talk about it. And it's like, woman, we're in the midst of all this, yet you're still going to talk about, Jeffrey and Melissa. But with that being said, those are my top 10 most emotional moments in the haves and the have-nots. I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, a lot of fans actually commented about how these videos are a great trip to through memory lane, because a lot of the stuff I bring up in these top 10 lists are things that a lot of characters have forgotten about, and for good reason, because it has been about 2+ years since like the first several seasons of the haves and the have-nots. Not to mention that the storyline has gotten a bit blown out of proportion with the stakes being higher, that we kind of forget how it got started. So with that being said, please hit that subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on your favorite moments in terms of emotional impact within the haves and the have-nots. And if there are any other top 10 or top 5 videos you would like me to do, leave your thoughts in the comment section below.